13. David Carrick. For 2 decades, an elite London Metropolitan Police officer named David Carrick terrorized an unknown number of women, using his job position to intimidate his victims into silence. Carrick allegedly threatened to plant drugs in one woman's car if she reported him, and saying that nobody would ever believe her over a high-ranking member of law enforcement. As an added warning, Carrick reminded the woman that he knew how to make evidence disappear. Victims accused Carrick of degrading them for hours on end, humiliating them in social settings, tracking their locations, and alienating them from their friends and family. One woman said that if she didn't fulfill Carrick's requests in the bedroom, he became physically abusive. On at least one occasion, he used his police-issued handcuffs to secure her wrist and ankle together, then left her home alone for hours. She finally left when he handcuffed her and threw her outside naked in the middle of the night. If Carrick got the sense that a woman might try to leave him, he allegedly intimidated his victims into staying by reminding her that he was a member of an elite police force that protects Britain's Prime Minister. When a woman mustered up the courage to leave, Carrick resorted to blackmail. An investigation found at least 9 complaints that women filed against Carrick between 2000 and 2021, including reports of alleged assaults. But no action was taken, and the paper trail ended there when the women either dropped the complaints or declined to formally pursue action. In one case, Carrick was put on administrative duties, but kept his job despite the seriousness of the allegations he faced. The case finally broke wide open in 2021, when a woman who met Carrick on a Tinder date gone horribly wrong reported his behavior. In footage of the arrest, the crooked cop seems annoyed to the point of acting arrogant, as if he couldn't believe some lower-ranking officers were daring to take a 20-year veteran of the force into custody. Carrick's fall off his high horse only continued from there, as more victims came forward and the investigation played out. He was ultimately convicted of 85 crimes against 12 women, and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. Authorities believe there are more victims and are encouraging them to come forward. 12. Charlene OBrien. While working as a deputy at the Conroe Montgomery County Jail in Texas in 2021, Charlene Diane OBrien had inappropriate relations with a 28-year-old inmate named Jacob Parker. According to court documents, a drug issue at the jail had left one of its housing units without any floor workers. To make up for the shortage, the unit's cleaning duties were carried out by inmate volunteers from other housing blocks, including Parker. During one of his shifts, he and OBrien allegedly snuck off into an area that was out of the sight of both cameras and staff members, where they kissed and did other things. It supposedly only happened once, but one time is too many when it comes to this type of misconduct. OBrien was let go from her job and criminally charged for her actions. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of improper activity with a person in custody and was sentenced to 100 days in jail. 11. Brian Philipak. During the early afternoon one day in November 2016, a sheriff's deputy in northern Michigan pulled a vehicle over in response to multiple 911 calls about an erratic driver. Behind the wheel was 47-year-old Brian Philipak, an off-duty sheriff's lieutenant from Washtenaw County in southern Michigan. In a report, Montmorency County Deputy Zachary Morrison noted seeing an open bottle of vodka in Philipak's vehicle and observing obvious signs of drunkenness. He also described the suspect as uncooperative. Body cam footage showed Philipak begging Morrison to let him go so he could sleep it off. Morrison later wrote in the report that the seemingly sloshed lawman repeatedly tried using his status as a member of law enforcement in an attempt to get out of being arrested. With a blood alcohol content of 0.27, more than 3 times the legal limit, Philipak was arrested on suspicion of violating Michigan's super drunk DWI law, which applies to suspected drunk drivers with a BAC of 0.17 or higher. He was stripped of his gun and badge, but continued working for the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office in a non-law enforcement role. Philipak pleaded guilty to a reduced drunk driving charge and was sentenced to a year of probation. But this wasn't his first run-in with the police over suspected drunkenness. In a July 2013 incident that was described in records obtained by MLive.com, a crying and visibly shaken girl hid inside an office at the Detroit airport and refused to come out, saying that she didn't want to ride home with her father because he was acting strangely. According to an incident report, an officer approached the girl's father, Philipak, and immediately noticed the smell of alcohol. Philipak allegedly said to the officer, "You won't arrest me," and "You don't know who I am, do you?" He admitted to having a few beers and driving to the airport, and was let go without charges, but warned that he would be arrested if he tried to drive. In a domestic incident that occurred several months later, Philipak's wife told police that her husband was getting treatment for alcohol abuse, but that he had come home obviously drunk. She wanted Philipak to leave for the night, but he apparently had nowhere to go and seemed too drunk to drive. In response to Philipak's history and the fact that he was reassigned to a non-police position rather than fired, Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton told MLive.com that he was aware of past incidents and that appropriate corrective action was taken. He also said that past incidents were considered in deciding how to handle Philipak's employment following the DWI charge, stating, "We don't ignore behavior that doesn't meet our expectations. None of us gets a free pass." 10. Seth Guar. An elderly woman's loved ones encountered a heartbreaking and infuriating scene in early 2023 when the 77-year-old was found emaciated and suffering from hypothermia, and with no heat or running water at her Rochester, Minnesota home. Her only companion, a Yorkshire Terrier, had starved to death after going weeks without being fed. The woman's family had entrusted the disabled senior citizen's care to a nearby resident, 51-year-old Seth Guar, but he allegedly failed to perform even the most basic of tasks, including filling her prescriptions, and was accused of making more than $12,000 in personal purchases with the victim's debit card. According to authorities, Guar spent the woman's money on car repairs, sneakers, clothing, and fast food. The victim's family further claimed that the purchases continued while the woman spent 2 weeks in the hospital after being found in a highly neglected state. Guar was charged 4 months later with elder abuse, stealing from an elderly person, misuse of a credit card, use of a motor vehicle without authority, operating a motor vehicle while unlicensed, animal cruelty, and 2 counts of forgery. He pleaded not guilty and was released on an ankle bracelet after forking over $11,000 bail. The case appears to be ongoing. During an interview with local station WCVB, a neighbor described the victim as lovely and warm and caring, and Guar as anything but, stating, "If you think of humans as being somebody who would help out somebody in need, he's exactly the opposite." 9. Daniel Holtzclaw. In 2014 and 2015, 13 women accused Oklahoma City police officer Daniel Holtzclaw of using his position as a cop to assault them and intimidate them into silence. One of his victims, a 57-year-old grandmother named Jannie Liggins, said that she was convinced Holtzclaw was going to kill her during a late-night traffic stop. She didn't think a police officer would do the things he had done to her and let the person live to tell the story, and was shocked when he let her go. Another woman, Shandegrion Sade Hill, reported being assaulted by Holtzclaw while handcuffed to a hospital bed. She later told CNN that the predatory officer continued stalking her afterward by following her to her home and following her on social media. Authorities accused Holtzclaw of specifically targeting black women in poor neighborhoods, including victims with drug and prostitution records, under the assumption that nobody would believe them if they complained. He was also charged with 36 counts in connection with 13 accusers. Holtzclaw's DNA was only connected to one of the assault cases in court, Prosecutors base their arguments mostly on other evidence, including GPS data corroborating the locations and routes victims provided in their complaints. The defense called the accusers' credibility into question based on their lifestyles and fought for Holtzclaw's complete and total innocence. In late 2015, the jury found him guilty of 18 counts relating to 8 victims and acquitted him of 18 other charges related to 5 accusers. He was sentenced to 263 years in prison. Holtzclaw's family has vowed to never stop fighting for his innocence, and he has attracted a considerable following of supporters who agree that he was wrongly convicted. Just as many people believe that he is wholly guilty of the crimes he's convicted of, and that he's exactly where he belongs. In 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Holtzclaw's appeal and upheld his conviction and sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court denied his request for a judicial review of the case the following year. 8. Christopher Hammond and Heather Hammond. Over a 3.5-year period beginning in December 2018, a husband and wife team allegedly abused their positions as U.S. Army officers to steal and sell expensive equipment while stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. According to federal prosecutors, 38-year-old Christopher Hammond used the privileges associated with his rank as a Chief Warrant Officer 3 to order guns and accessories, welding and metalworking equipment, guitars, ATVs, tools, and other items of resale value. The goods were never logged as inventory, nor were they used by Hammond's unit. Investigators counted at least 200 items that were issued to the unit, but went straight into the crooked officer's hands for personal gain. In an email dated April 2021, Hammond confirmed an order of 50 rifle scopes and asked the shipper to make sure the parts weren't broken. He claimed that the scopes were requested for use during an upcoming deployment, but it was a lie. In another email exchange, a civilian sent some ill-gotten parts from Hammond to the manufacturer for repairs under warranty. A company representative sent the person an email instructing them to use their government email address and refusing to service the parts until authenticity was verified. In response, Hammond sent an email to the company stating that he was overseas with little internet access and complaining that an employee was holding the parts up for service. He claimed he needed the parts for training with his unit, but that was never the case. Authorities counted nearly $1.9 million in wire transfers that were deposited into bank accounts controlled by Hammond and his wife, Major Heather Hammond, over a 2-year period. While Christopher was accused of masterminding the scheme, prosecutors said that Heather knowingly allowed her husband to launder money through her bank accounts. In 2023, Christopher pleaded guilty to federal counts of theft, possession of government property, and money laundering. He faces up to 30 years in prison for his crimes. Heather took her case to trial and was convicted of spending money laundering proceeds and aiding and abetting. She faces up to 10 years behind bars. The pilfering pair can also expect to be fined when they're sentenced in late 2023. According to court documents, the Army wants their stuff back and plans to go after the couple's bank accounts to recoup the cost of items that can't be recovered. 7. Ggel Curry. During her time as a civilian worker at the Washington County Jail in Oregon, Ggel Curry began a torrid affair with 25-year-old gang member Jang Delgado Gelban. On at least 13 occasions throughout 2014, she snuck the maximum security inmate out of his cell and into a nearby supply closet for a clandestine quickie. Before each encounter, Curry waited until the sheriff's deputy, who worked in the control room, went to lunch. She then unlocked Delgado Gelban's cell and 2 other doors so he could get to their meeting place. Curry was busted after an anonymous tipster reported the illicit relationship to law enforcement. Investigators soon discovered that in addition to the steamy closet sessions, she had been putting money on Delgado Gelban's books and writing him letters under an alias. Curry was charged with 12 felony counts of misconduct and over a dozen misdemeanors. Shortly after her arrest, her husband, a sheriff's deputy, filed for divorce. After turning down a plea offer that would have sentenced her to 36 months in prison, she pleaded guilty to all counts. She tearfully apologized for her behavior and for putting her colleagues in danger. But the judge doubted her sincerity and sentenced her to 50 months, more than double the time recommended by prosecutors. During the investigation into Curry's misconduct, police discovered that another civilian employee, 32-year-old Britt Robinson, also had inappropriate relations with Delgado Galban. According to authorities, Robinson was also a control room employee. She led Delgado Galban out of his cell at least 6 times. But instead of hooking up in the supply closet, they met on the control room stairs. The two women were unaware that they were both sleeping with the same prisoner. After being caught and charged with 12 counts of misconduct, Robinson tried to argue in court that she was not guilty due to mental health issues. Her lawyer claimed that she was delusional during the encounters with Delgado Galban, and that her actions were therefore involuntary. But the judge denied the defense's request to present this argument at trial, and Robinson ultimately pleaded guilty as charged. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 6. Judge Jack Robison. In early 2018, a Texas jury in Comal County reached a guilty verdict in the case of an accused human trafficker named Gloria Romero Perez. After learning that the jury had voted to convict Perez, Judge Jack Robison entered the deliberation room and said that he believed the defendant was not guilty. He told the jurors that God had told him Perez was innocent and that a conviction would be a miscarriage of justice. Robison urged the group to deliberate for a little while longer and see if they come to a different conclusion. They stood by their guilty verdict and reported that the judge had tried to influence their ruling. While apologizing to the jury a short while later, Robison reportedly said, "When God tells me I gotta do something, I gotta do it." He came clean about his actions to the defense and prosecution and recused himself from the sentencing phase of the trial at the prosecution's request. In a self-report to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, Robison explained that he became increasingly convinced throughout the trial that anything other than a not guilty ruling would be inappropriate. He admitted in the report that he still believed the prosecution failed to present sufficient evidence to prove its case, but acknowledged that he had committed misconduct. Numerous other people involved in the case filed complaints with the commission, including the prosecutor, who accused Robison of exhibiting bias in favor of the defendant throughout the trial. 2 jurors claimed that the judge entered the deliberation room, but twice with his requests for them to reconsider their decision. In October 2018, a different judge who had taken over the case declared a mistrial. He ruled that Robison made multiple rulings that were not in accordance with the law, and that he failed to remain impartial in his comments about witnesses and evidence. The commission ruled that Robison was likely suffering from a temporary episode of delirium when he inserted himself into the jury's conversation. He was let off with a warning after providing letters from doctors attesting to his sanity and reassuring the panel that he had not experienced any more episodes since that day in court. The decision to allow Robison to remain on the bench infuriated some people, including the jury's foreman, Mark House, who told Routers that he believed the judge should have been fined and removed from the bench. Many agree, and it's cases like these and their light-handed outcomes that wear away at the public's trust in the system and cause people to question its integrity. 5. Lisa Talton Wells Doherty. While working as a care technician at an assisted living facility in Etowah County, Alabama, 57-year-old Lisa Talton Wells Doherty became the power of attorney for an elderly resident. She immediately began siphoning the woman's accounts and buying expensive gifts for herself, including $2 million homes, multiple cars, and dental implants costing $86,000. Doherty drained the victim of her entire life savings of more than $8.5 million, and also took control of the woman's $1.5 million property. But it's almost impossible to steal that much money without someone noticing. And state authorities launched an investigation into Doherty's crimes after receiving a tip from federal law enforcement. Doherty was arrested in 2021 and has remained behind bars ever since while sorting out the world of legal problems on her plate. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of felony financial exploitation of an elderly person. She was sentenced to 20 years with the requirement to serve at least 5 years in prison before becoming eligible for parole. Even in the best-case scenario, however, it's unlikely that Doherty will see freedom anytime soon. In addition to her state case, she faces pending federal charges of wire fraud, money laundering, filing a false tax return, and theft of government property. If convicted on the wire fraud charge alone, she could spend up to 20 years in prison. Needless to say, her days of swindling senior citizens are over for now. 4. Richard Bomgardner. Tennessee Judge Richard Bomgardner was highly regarded for the majority of his nearly 20 years on the bench. Known for being fair and ethical, he oversaw several high-profile cases, pushed for cameras to be allowed in courtrooms, and founded a drug court program in Knox County that served as the model of similar programs throughout the state. His downfall began in 2006. When he became addicted to painkillers that he received for a broken toe. Starting in late 2007, Bomgardner began receiving prescriptions for pain pills from at least 12 doctors, including a veterinarian, amounting to more than 2,200 pills over a 2-year period. He was also an alcoholic. When doctors became less willing to write prescriptions, Bomgardner began regularly buying pills from probationers and drug court participants whose cases he oversaw. In 2009, a drug court participant named Dina Castleman asked Bomgardner for help getting a job. Instead, he paid her to find pills for him and pressured her to become his mistress. He also bought her a cell phone for arranging the drug transactions. Bomgardner's substance abuse became noticeable to others. He began showing signs of impairment on the bench and frequently smelled of booze. His need for pills became so out of control that he sometimes made drug deals during court breaks. The judge's colleagues also started catching on to his affair with Castleman, who had criminal cases that were being overseen by other judges. In addition to urging at least one judge to drop charges against the young woman, Bomgardner convinced another judge to vacate an arrest warrant by lying and saying that he was working with Castleman to sort out her court matters. In 2010, he pressured a prosecutor for leniency in one of Castleman's cases. When Castleman failed a drug test for a sober housing program, Bomgardner called the director and said that she had actually tested clean. State authorities eventually launched an investigation into the rumors and allegations surrounding Bomgardner's drug use and arrested him for his alleged crimes. In March 2011, he resigned from the bench and pleaded guilty to official misconduct. Bomgardner was spared from prison time in the state's case, but was sentenced to 6 months behind bars after being convicted in federal court of lying to investigators. He was also disbarred, and many of the high-profile defendants who were convicted in his court were granted new trials due to the possibility of the judge making decisions while impaired. Bomgardner died from natural causes at the age of 70 in 2018, following years of declining health. 3. Ronald Davis. When her 4-month affair with a married Pennsylvania state trooper soured in September 2023, 37-year-old Michelle Perfinoff was violently tackled and hauled off to a psych ward under bogus claims. According to a criminal complaint, Perfinoff and 37-year-old Ronald Davis became entangled in a bitter feud after Davis locked Perfinoff out of his trailer, where she was living at the time, and refused to let her collect her belongings from a storage unit. Several days later, Davis obtained an order to place Perfinoff in a psychiatric emergency room on an involuntary hold. To demonstrate probable cause, he cited text message conversations in which Perfinoff appeared to make threats to self-harm. The off-duty cop then summoned help from his fellow troopers in tracking Perfinoff down so they could serve the order. When none of Davis's colleagues could find his mistress, he took matters into his own hands. With help from an unnamed civilian, he found Perfinoff in a picnic area at a state park and tackled her to the ground while she acted genuinely confused about what was going on and why she was being physically subdued. Disturbing footage showed Davis sitting on the much smaller woman's legs as she repeatedly expressed her desire to be left alone and said there was no valid reason for her to be taken into custody. Pervanov repeatedly told Davis to get off of her, but he refused, and he also failed to explain why she was being detained, even though she asked him multiple times. And when Pervanov tried to break free, Davis became even more forceful and overpowering. State troopers came to the scene and took Pervanov to a mental hospital, where she stayed for a few days before doctors concluded that she was mentally sound and didn't pose any threats to herself or others. She gave law enforcement her side of the story and explained how her text messages were blown out of context by Davis, who most likely knew that Pervanov wasn't making any real threats, since the messages were meant as an obvious mockery of his alleged controlling and cruel behavior. Pervanov told police that Davis had previously threatened to paint her as crazy and warned that he knew how to use the law to his advantage. After reviewing the evidence and circumstances, prosecutors agreed that Pervanov was wrongfully detained and have accused Davis of misrepresenting the text message conversation in order to obtain the psychiatric hold order. In an affidavit, the state further accused the trooper of failing to get his supervisor's permission to physically restrain Pervanov. Davis faces charges of felony strangulation, unlawful restraint, false imprisonment, simple assault, recklessly endangering another person, and official oppression. As of September 2023, he was being held without bail while maintaining his innocence from behind bars. 2. Ana Betty Molina and Javier Molina. After his wife of 70 years passed away in 2012, Gustav Shapiro hired Ana Betty Molina as his housekeeper. The 95-year-old from Montgomery County, Maryland, began to show signs of delusional thinking, which played a role in his decision to cut ties with his adult son. Shapiro was lonely and depressed, making him a prime target for an opportunist looking to swindle big bucks out of a vulnerable and unsuspecting senior citizen. With Shapiro's last remaining family connection severed, Molina and her husband Javier began helping themselves to the elderly man's money in 2013. The couple withdrew thousands of dollars at a time from the victim's accounts and deposited it into their personal accounts. On one occasion, the Molinas got their hands on $300,000 of Gustav's money in one fell swoop via a cashier's check. Much of this activity was carried out with the victim's blessing, but his ability to understand and consent to the transactions was highly questionable. Records would later show that the Molinas gambled away a large portion of the money, squandering an estimated $60,000 to $70,000 per month when their habit was at its worst. The couple also bought a car and a house, which they moved Shapiro into and paid their daughter's college tuition with the stolen funds. Meanwhile, Shapiro granted Ana power of attorney over his assets, including a home he had owned since 1957, and listed her as the sole beneficiary of his will. Concerned bank employees called Adult Protective Services for the first time in 2013 after noticing the dramatic increase in Shapiro's banking activity. He was uncooperative with investigators, who eventually convinced him to allow a home visit and ruled that he was capable of making his own decisions and not in any danger. The case was closed, and the theft continued as Shapiro became increasingly confused from dementia and old age. He also became more agitated, and while his aggression was blamed on his medical conditions, at least one person would later testify that Gustav knew that Ana had taken all his money and that there was almost none left. People also noticed that Ana had stopped keeping up with Gustav's care, and she began making comments about waiting for him to die. He passed away in 2016, 3 months into the third Adult Protective Services investigation into his well-being and Ana's questionable control over his finances. The full scope of Molina's crimes was finally discovered after Shapiro's death, and justice came calling shortly thereafter. Ana and Javier were convicted of 5 felonies, including theft, conspiracy to commit theft, financial exploitation of an adult over 68 in an amount over $100,000, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The judge sentenced Anna to 10 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, while Javier received a 6-year sentence, followed by 5 years of post-release supervision. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. 1. Michael Ggel, a 74-year-old priest from Omaha, Nebraska, lost so much of his own money to a scammer that he took advantage of his position within his church to continue acquiring funds for the swindler. According to court documents, Father Michael Ggel's downward spiral began when he started loaning large amounts of money to a homeless man named Michael Barrett, believing the recipient would eventually pay him back. The priest continued giving Barrett money even after it would have been clear to anyone with sound judgment that the money would never be repaid. When his own savings and retirement fund ran dry, Ggel began stealing money from Father Ted Richling, an elderly priest with dementia who had granted Ggel power of attorney over his money and assets. For reasons that may never be explained, Ggel stole an estimated $180,000 from Richling and handed it over to Barrett, who gambled the majority of it away. Ggel's theft was discovered during an audit in 2021. He was originally charged with felony theft and abuse of a vulnerable adult, but ended up pleading guilty to 2 reduced misdemeanor theft counts. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of probation, and many questions surrounding the case remain unanswered. After learning the amount of money that Ggel gave to Barrett, many people naturally wondered if he was being blackmailed, perhaps paying hush money to keep the word from leaking about an affair, a drug habit, or something else that would get him kicked out of the diocese. Making the situation even more suspicious is the fact that Barrett isn't Catholic and was never a parishioner at the priest's church. Ggel insisted that he wasn't being extorted or blackmailed, and that he was just doing what he believed was right and helping someone in need. His lawyer even speculated that it was an extortion case, and Ggel was given numerous opportunities to come forward with any deeper truths that may lie beneath the surface. But he stuck by his story, even though it's hard to believe that anyone could be naive or gullible enough to fall for such an obvious scam. In court, Ggel said he kept meticulous records of the money he loaned to Barrett, suggesting that he really believed the money would be paid back. He also said that he considered anything he took from Richling to be a loan and insisted that he had full intentions to pay it back. In addition to his most recent case, Ggel was previously accused of stealing over $100,000 from his previous parish. A criminal case against him was dropped when he paid the church. It's unclear what the money was used for.
Number 9. Caitlyn OBrien and Shay Sturt. 31-year-old Caitlyn OBrien was well aware that her decade-long relationship with Shay Sturt was toxic, but the young Australian woman's repeated attempts to escape him were unsuccessful. As much as she wanted to get away from the violence Sturt subjected her to, she couldn't seem to fully let go. It was reportedly common for O'Brien, who worked as a nurse, to show up at her job in Melbourne crying and with visible injuries from the couple's latest fight. And by the time things took a deadly turn, the courtroom had become a familiar place for her and Sturt. During one incident back in 2010, she suggested that Sturt might need mental help for his temper, and he responded by punching her in the head several times. On another occasion, Sturt struck O'Brien during a disagreement about furniture. Over the years, O'Brien sought medical help at least 30 times for injuries allegedly caused by her partner, and the police were called often enough to most likely be on a first-name basis with the couple. But there were limits to what the justice system could do to separate the pair, especially since O'Brien often withdrew her complaint or dropped charges against her boyfriend. In other instances, Sturt suffered only minor consequences for his behavior. Meanwhile, his psychological state went from paranoid and hostile to dangerously delusional, and his worsening mental issues went untreated. O'Brien finally made the decision to leave for good when Sturt had a violent psychotic episode that caused her to fear for her life. While he was detained in the mental ward, she contacted an ex and asked if she could stay with him, and she stressed that it was an emergency. But he didn't pick up on the urgency of the matter and instead told O'Brien to wait a few days to be sure of her decision. It was during that window of time that Sturt was released from the hospital. He went straight to O'Brien's apartment, and a brutal struggle ensued. Caitlyn did her best to try fighting Sturt off, but he overpowered her and stabbed her multiple times with a pair of scissors before smothering her to death with a pillow. Less than 36 hours earlier, Sturt had promised never to hurt his girlfriend. And while O'Brien wanted to believe he had the best of intentions, there were signs that something dangerous would inevitably happen if she didn't get away from him. Even if Caitlyn didn't notice the red flags firsthand, other people saw the writing on the wall. Unfortunately, by the time authorities locked Sturt up for any meaningful length of time, Caitlyn was dead. The only reassuring takeaway from this senseless tragedy is the fact that he'll spend at least 22 years behind bars before he sees freedom again. Number 8. Hamburg church shooting. In early 2023, officials from Germany's Weapons Control Authority received an anonymous letter from a concerned civilian. The civilian suspected a 35-year-old former Jehovah's Witness from Hamburg named Philip Fuzz of being mentally unstable. According to the letter, Fuzz seemed angry with fellow members of his church, and they were worried that he would take drastic action against them. More specifically, the note warned that Fuzz might be suffering from an undiagnosed mental illness and that he harbored anger specifically against the Jehovah's Witnesses and his former employer. Authorities visited Fuzz but found no reason to take away his gun, the same gun he used to commit a horrific shooting during a service at a local Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall 2 months later. Police rushed to the scene, but by the time they got there, 4 men and 2 women between the ages of 33 and 60 were dead. 8 others were injured, including 4 victims who sustained serious injuries. Fuzz, who had reportedly left the church 18 months earlier, then turned the gun on himself before members of the local Special Forces team could apprehend him. Although Fuzz left the church voluntarily, his departure apparently did not occur on good terms. But people are more concerned over why his gun wasn't taken away, rather than his falling out with the congregation. Fuzz was reportedly cooperative during the visit to his house 2 months before the shooting, and the authorities left after issuing a verbal warning to him for not keeping a bullet locked up in his safe. During a press conference, Police Chief Ralph Martin Meyer said that Fuzz had no criminal record and that law enforcement had no legal grounds to revoke his gun. At the scene, investigators uncovered a backpack full of ammunition. A search of the gunman's apartment turned up 15 loaded magazines with 15 cartridges each and 4 boxes of ammunition containing 200 cartridges. While many believe the deadly shooting could have and should have been prevented, Meyer credited the quick police response for preventing even more lives from being lost. Number 7. South Korea crowd crush. After enduring more than 2 years of life in lockdown and other COVID-19 related restrictions that prevented large crowds from gathering in Korea, an estimated 100,000 people went out in downtown Seoul to celebrate Halloween in 2022. It was the first post-pandemic Halloween party in the country's capital, and after being cooped up at home for so long, people were ready to let loose. Early on in the evening, police began receiving calls from concerned partygoers who noticed that the crowd was becoming dangerously congested. Fearing a deadly stampede or a crowd crush, callers urged law enforcement to report to the scene and help get things under control. But nobody came, and the conditions only became more cramped as more and more people shoved their way into a narrow alley. Hours after the first emergency call was placed, the exact thing the emergency callers were trying to prevent from happening occurred. A massive crowd crush, which resulted in the deaths of at least 156 people. Another 172 people were hurt, including at least 33 partygoers who suffered from serious injuries. Afterward, authorities claimed that they didn't receive their first call for help until after 10 o'clock p.m., around the time of the crush. But records showed that they received calls as early as 6:34 p.m., nearly 4 hours earlier. In the tragedy's aftermath, Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo called for an investigation into law enforcement's failure to act sooner, which would have undoubtedly saved lives. Number 6. Casey Brittle and Sanchez Williams. 21-year-old Casey Brittle was beaten to death in 2011 after suffering for years at the hands of her daughter's father, 27-year-old Sanchez Williams. The couple's child witnessed the brutality firsthand, and Williams allegedly sat and did nothing for 2 hours while the young mother laid unconscious at their home in Nottinghamshire, England. Sadly, there were at least 11 missed opportunities over a 2-year period for authorities to take action against Williams, which would have arguably spared Casey Brittle's life. In addition to the couple's well-known history of domestic incidents, Williams had a lengthy rap sheet that demonstrated his capacity to be violent. Following Brittle's murder, authorities accused the police of failing to take even the most basic measures to protect the victim. This failure was partially blamed on Brittle's tendency to downplay her boyfriend's abuse, something she reportedly did because she feared he would inflict even worse harm against her if she told law enforcement the full truth. Some might say that it was easy to pick up on this fear based on Brittle's reluctance to press charges against Williams. Yet police failed to question why the young woman called them repeatedly and then hesitated, according to an incident report. After being found guilty of Brittle's murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years, it'll be a long time before Williams can harm another woman. But many believe that Brittle's death could have been prevented if law enforcement had simply picked up on the obvious signs that she desperately needed their protection. Number 5. The murder of Rashim Carter. A 25-year-old African-American father named Rashim Carter was last seen at a motel in Laurel, Mississippi in October of 2022. Just a day earlier, he had gone to the Taylorsville Police Department and reported that several men were after him. He also told his mom, Tiffany, that 3 trucks with white men were chasing him and yelling racial slurs, and he made it clear that he believed his life was in danger. Tiffany later said that Carter had fled from his workplace after a disagreement with a co-worker. When Carter failed to materialize, his concerned loved ones reported him missing. About a month after his disappearance, his severed head was found in a remote wooded area. The rest of his remains were found elsewhere. Someone obviously did something terrible and evil to Rashim, and his family wants justice, but they feel like law enforcement has failed to take meaningful action. The Smith County Sheriff's Office has said that there's no reason to suspect foul play in Carter's death, and reportedly told the family that wild animals may have torn Carter's body apart. Tiffany and Rashim's other loved ones are now calling for a federal investigation into what appears to them to be a needless tragedy. The family is represented by prominent attorney Ben Crump, who said during a press conference in early 2023 that the Carters believe law enforcement is trying to sweep Rashim's murder under the rug. They also believe he was the victim of a hate crime based on the things he told them shortly before his death. Crump implored the U.S. Department of Justice to take action where state and local authorities are failing to do so, and to investigate the disturbing incident, which he described as a Mississippi lynching, as a civil rights case. Laurel Police Chief Tommy Cox told NBC News that his department took the initial missing persons report about Carter, but denied that Rashim had gone to the agency seeking help. Cox also said that the department handed the case over to the Smith County Sheriff's Office shortly after the report was filed because it was outside their jurisdiction, but that he believed his officers tried to do the right thing and looked into the case to the extent that they could. In addition to what seems to many like a lack of concern on behalf of the Smith County Sheriff's Office over Carter's death, there are lingering unanswered questions, including why authorities chose to search the area where they found his remains. The cause of his death also remains unclear. According to Tiffany Carter, her son was coherent and did not seem to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol during their last conversations. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation has joined the probe but declined to comment, citing the ongoing nature of the case. In the meantime, Rashim's family, friends, and young daughter are left to carry on without him. They are left without knowing exactly what happened to him, and if anyone who might have been involved will ever face justice. Number 4. Senseless gym shooting of military veteran. A 34-year-old United States Marine named Harrison Bordenave was working out at a gym in Opelousas, Louisiana in early 2023 when a man later identified as 34-year-old Jason Leday approached him. The two men exchanged some words, and for reasons that aren't particularly clear, Leday allegedly told Bordenave, "You don't need all that cardio because cardio is not going to help you outrun a bullet." Bordenave's cousin Ron Haley later told local station KLFY that Leday approached Bordenave again just a few weeks later and hurled racial slurs at him. Haley said that his cousin filed a police report over the incident, but that law enforcement didn't take the complaint seriously. He even claimed that one officer looked at Bordenave's US Marines tattoo and made a comment alluding to him having post-traumatic stress disorder and overreacting. Feeling as though the police responded inadequately to the report, Bordenave's mother, Charlotte, tried to take surveillance footage of her son's interactions with Leday to the police station. Less than 24 hours later, someone approached Bordenave at the gym and shot him in the chest at point-blank range. He died from his injuries. Police arrested Leday on suspicion of murder, something that Bordenave's loved ones believe could have been prevented if law enforcement had taken more action upon receiving his initial complaint. Charlotte Bordenave also thinks that the authorities should have looked into Leday's extensive criminal history, which she believes reflects his capacity to be violent. Speaking with KLFY, she said, "Shame on you. Do better. Do better by the citizens you're sworn to protect and serve. It should not come to this. It should not come to the death of a person for your job to be done. The investigation is ongoing." Number 3. A woman's worst nightmare. In early 2023, roughly 30 years after enduring a horrifying, life-changing experience that she believes she never saw justice for, a 43-year-old Australian woman named Karen Isles came forward publicly to tell her story. At the time of the incident back in 1993, she and a friend had travelled from New South Wales to Queensland's Gold Coast for a family beach vacation. While they were there, a group of 15 men nearly twice their age began talking to Karen and invited her to come have lunch where they were staying. In hindsight, she realized they were grooming her, but as a naive teenager, she didn't know any better. Once she got there, one of the men pushed her into a room and assaulted her, while the rest of the group looked on and eventually joined in. During an interview with news.com.au 3 decades later, Karen described their behavior as very orchestrated and methodical. In other words, the crime seemed clearly planned out. When the horrific attack was finally over, the young woman ran back to her family and best friend and continued the day as planned, doing her best to act like nothing was wrong. She didn't tell her family what happened, but they noticed a dramatic change in her behavior. After years of suspecting that something was deeply wrong, her concerned loved ones read her diary and learned about the assault. They encouraged Karen to press charges, but she still blamed herself and wasn't ready to go to the police. Finally, during an International Women's Day march in 2004, she realized that the assault wasn't her fault. She went to the Newtown police with her diary and described in detail what had happened, right down to the exact date, time, and place the incident occurred. Karen also provided the names of another victim and a witness. Law enforcement reassured her that they would launch a multi-agency investigation into the case, but the probe quickly ground to a halt. Nearly 2 decades later, she is still trying to figure out why the case was closed just 1 week after she made the report, and why her statement was fed to a paper shredder in 2018. Over the last 19 years, she says she has tried desperately and to no avail to persuade the police to take action. Karen said that her interactions with authorities have only added to the trauma of the assault that she suffered from to begin with. She's now campaigning for new laws in Australia that would require officers to thoroughly investigate these types of assaults and would hold them accountable if they fail to follow through on this duty. Number 2. The arrest of Karen Garner. When employees saw an elderly woman leave a Walmart store in Loveland, Colorado, with unpaid merchandise one day in 2020, they confronted her in the parking lot. The woman, later identified as 73-year-old Karen Garner, was carrying $14 worth of items, including a t-shirt, candy, and soda. She allegedly offered to pay for the goods, but the workers wouldn't let her. Instead, they took the items back and called the police. In the meantime, Karen walked away from the scene. Staff members and local authorities didn't know that she suffers from dementia and sensory aphasia, which sometimes affects her ability to understand language comprehension. While responding to the call, Officer Austin Hopp found Karen picking wildflowers on the side of the road. In a video of the encounter, Hopp could be heard telling the senior citizen to stop as he approached her on foot. Karen glanced back at him with a seemingly confused expression on her face, then continued walking with her freshly picked batch of flowers. Hopp almost immediately grabbed Karen's arms from behind, then took the 80-pound, 36-kilogram septuagenarian to the ground and handcuffed her. The terror in her voice was evident as she insisted to the officer that she was on her way home and didn't do anything wrong. With help from fellow officer Daria Jalali, who could have tried to intervene on what many would later describe as a clear display of excessive force, Hopp hog-tied Karen and forced her into a squad car. When a bystander questioned the cop's aggressive behavior, Hopp told the person to go away and that it was none of their business. A police station surveillance camera later captured Hopp, Jalali, and a third officer, Tyler Blackett, laughing and fist-bumping each other while reviewing bodycam footage of the arrest. Hopp could be heard describing Garner as senile and admitting that he dislocated her shoulder and failed to administer her Miranda rights. All three officers resigned when the case fell under public scrutiny. Hopp was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault after taking a plea deal, and Jalali received a 45-day jail sentence for misconduct and for failing to intervene on or report Hopp's use of excessive force. Garner was left with lasting physical damage, including limited use of her left arm. Her family sued the city and the officers involved on her behalf for using excessive force and failing to provide medical care, and received a $3 million settlement. But it won't solve the trauma she endured or heal her injuries. Number 1. Scott Shepard and Conrad Gagner. In July of 2022, officials in the small city of Cottage Grove, Oregon, launched an investigation into the alleged misconduct of the local police chief, Scott Shepard, and former police captain Conrad Gagner. The city's leaders declined to comment to the press on the nature of the allegations against the pair, who resigned from their positions just days after being put on administrative leave. In early 2023, the Register Guard revealed the details of several complaints that were lodged against Shepard and Gagner around the time of the investigation. Getting their hands on the material wasn't easy, but they finally obtained the information through a public records request that was granted to another local publication, The Chronicle, after they were initially denied and appealed the decision. According to the documents, Gagner was accused of using racial and homophobic slurs in the workplace and posting inappropriate and offensive content on social media, and Shepard allegedly failed to do anything about it. The findings also claimed that the pair were guilty of other misconduct and unprofessional behavior, including failing to run the local jail properly and failing to assist other local law enforcement agencies. Even after the limited details of the situation were made public, the city's manager, Richard Myers, failed to respond to a request for a comment. In the initial notices issued to Shepard and Gagner about their potential termination, he wrote that their actions placed the city at risk of unneeded liability and described their behavior as extremely unacceptable. From what little information is available, it seems as though there were some serious breaches of professionalism within the agency, which is under the command of Interim Chief Jeff Groth, and it's most likely only a matter of time before journalists uncover more details about the scandal that the agency seems determined to keep quiet.
Thanks for watching. If a friend offered to use their connections to score highly coveted tickets to a concert or sports game you really wanted to attend, and you knew they were probably using their position to their advantage in a highly questionable way, would you accept the offer, or would you skip out on the event of a lifetime for the sake of keeping your moral compass intact? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.